Oleg Gordievsky was born in 1938 in the Soviet Union and grew up in a family deeply connected to Soviet intelligence. He joined the KGB after college and quickly ascended through its ranks. But soon he would become one of Great Britain's most effective double agents during the Cold War. Now, while stationed in Denmark in the late 1960s, Gordievsky became disenchanted with the Soviet Union. Their violent suppression of the Czechoslovakian reform movement only accelerated his hatred of communism. British intelligence officers in Denmark identified him as a potential recruit, beginning the careful process of cultivating Gordievsky. They needed to make sure he was sincere and genuine and not a KGB double agent. After a period of time during which Gordievsky's disenchantment with the Soviets became even more evident, MI6 formally recruited him. They promised him, in exchange for Soviet secrets, that they would help him defect to the West in the future. Now, what risks come with being a double agent? Hi, I'm MF Thomas, and this is My Dark Path, where I explore the fringes of history, science, and the paranormal. And this is the story of Oleg Gordievsky, the spy who changed the world. As a double agent, KGB officer Gordievsky met covertly with his handlers from MI6. His diplomatic status gave him freedom to travel, making his spying easier. He also helped identify Soviet spies in Western governments and institutions. He played a critical role during a tense period in 1983 when the Soviet Union misinterpreted a NATO exercise as a potential first strike. He reassured Soviet leadership that this was merely an exercise and not a prelude to a nuclear attack. This helped prevent a potentially catastrophic misunderstanding. But after spying for the West for 11 years, in May of 1985, something unsettling upended Gordievsky's life. He'd been promoted to the role of KGB's London station chief when he was recalled suddenly to Moscow. Now, this was very unusual, and Gordievsky feared the worst, that the KGB had discovered that he was a double agent. And so what happened next? MI6, aware of the peril that he faced with the recall, told him that he and his family could defect immediately. Yet, on May 19th, he chose to return to Moscow. And upon arrival, Gordievsky was whisked away to a KGB safe house, where he endured long hours of drug-fueled interrogation and was told that he would never work overseas again. Then the KGB unexpectedly released him. Suspicion loomed over him, but his superiors hesitated to act without more evidence. And by June, his family returned to Moscow, leaving London behind. Meanwhile, a covert chess game was being played by MI6 and the CIA. While the British shared Gordievsky's intel with the CIA, they kept his identity a secret. The Americans, determined to uncover this mysterious informant, eventually pieced together that it must be Gordievsky. But back in Moscow, Gordievsky was working at a menial job at the KGB while they looked for hard evidence that he was in fact a double agent. Now, it's thought that Aldrich Ames, a high-ranking CIA officer and traitor, had sold out Gordievsky to the Soviets. The timeline was damning. Ames first contacted and sold secrets to the KGB on May 15th of 1985, and it was just the next day that Gordievsky was recalled from London. A later FBI report about the incident said that it wasn't until June 13th that Ames blew Gordievsky's cover to the Soviets, and by then the KGB had already recalled him and had him under watch in Moscow, but still left him uncharged with treason. Now, as Ames' betrayal had rocked the US government, the FBI report was probably just an exercise in bureaucratic excuse-making. Still, many believe that Ames' initial meeting with the KGB in Washington provided enough intelligence for Colonel Viktor Budanov, the KGB's top investigator, to initiate a probe and recall Gordievsky. Now, in July of 1985, MI6 initiated a daring operation to help Gordievsky escape the Soviet Union. Despite being under the watchful eye of the KGB, he sent a secret signal to MI6, a bold move that would trigger his exfiltration. Per the plan, On a specific evening at 7:30 p.m., Gordievsky stood with a Safeway bag in hand on a busy Moscow street. An MI6 agent strolled past while munching on a Mars bar and carrying a Harrods bag. The agent met Gordievsky's gaze, and the exchange of signals triggered MI6 to execute an escape plan that had been designed by their agent, Valery Petit. The next action from MI6 would be to exfiltrate him from the USSR. And on July 19, 1985, Gordievsky left his apartment for a regular run through the city, and it would be the last time he ever set foot in his home. Now, per the plan, he left his home that morning and then evaded his KGB shadows, eventually boarding a train to Leningrad and then another to Vyborg, a town near the Soviet-Finnish border. British diplomats met him at the train station. They had just raced through the town to elude their own KGB tails. And the diplomats drove a unique Ford Sierra that had a special feature, a hidden compartment in the trunk. The space was so small that they gave Gordievsky a sedative to make it tolerable. The KGB, of course, had gone into a frenzy when Gordievsky had lost his tail that morning in Moscow, and their frustration only increased as they searched for him across the country. But the British diplomats with the carefully hidden Gordievsky made their way to the Finnish border. Now, these British diplomats would need more than just the hidden compartment to get Gordievsky across the border. According to their plan, there were 2 more passengers that were required for the mission. They were the diplomats' wives. When they arrived at the Finnish border, the 4 people got out of the car. The guards and dogs approached to search, and one of the wives dropped her baby's dirty diaper on the ground by the trunk, causing the dogs to recoil in confusion. They failed to find the compartment that hid Gordievsky, and the group successfully passed into Finland and freedom. And from there, MI6 covertly transferred him to Great Britain. The Soviet authorities, once they learned of his defection, were outraged and sentenced him to death in absentia. And what became of his family back in the Soviet Union? So when double agent Gordievsky defected, it humiliated the KGB and derailed the careers of many of its leaders. And that included Viktor Babanov, the KGB's chief of counterintelligence, who had initially suspected Gordievsky and triggered his recall and investigation. Gordievsky's wife, Lila, was a daughter of a KGB officer and was unaware of his plan to defect. Nevertheless, she was detained for almost 6 years while the Soviets tried to prove that she had known of Gordievsky's spying. She lost her job and apartment, and the British government, along with Gordievsky himself, tried to free his family from the Soviet Union. And finally, in 1991, 6 years after his defection, Lila and his 2 daughters were finally allowed to leave the Soviet Union and join him in the United Kingdom. Now, sadly, 2 years after they arrived in the UK, Oleg and Lila's marriage dissolved and they never saw each other again. And so what is Oleg Gordievsky doing today? After defecting to the UK, Gordievsky continued to work for MI6. His primary role was as a consultant and expert on Soviet intelligence operations, offering invaluable insights into the workings of the KGB. Gordievsky's defection and subsequent work with British intelligence provided the West with a deeper understanding of Soviet espionage tactics. In addition to his consulting, Gordievsky also authored several books about espionage and the Soviet Union, and his most notable book was Next Stop Execution, the autobiography of Oleg Gordievsky, and it provides a detailed account of his life, his career in the KGB, and his decision to become a double agent. Now, Gordievsky's life in the UK has not been without its challenges. His death sentence by the Soviet Union has still not been rescinded by Russia, and he continues to receive protection from MI6 due to threats against his life. Today, he lives in a secret location somewhere in the UK. Thank you for watching this episode of My Dark Path. What do you think of the story of Oleg Gordievsky, and what surprised you most about his escape from the Soviet Union? Please comment, and we'll see you soon in another episode.